to our Western New York 8 to 12 millimeter thinning recommendations meeting. Just a reminder to mute yourself. If you have any questions, you could put in the chat box, or after the speakers are done, you could unmute yourself and ask the questions manually. We will be recording this, and it should be posted on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow, and it'll go out in our email blasts and fruit facts as well. I'm going to turn it over to Mario first. Mario, you can share your screen. He's going to talk about the observations, what he's seeing in the field in Western New York in the last couple days before we turn it over to Terence.
So this was done yesterday from 11 to 7 p.m., almost all day. And I was curious to see the fruit size for Gela. And if you see Gela, I thought Gela could be closer to 10 or even above to 10. And Gela, I have 1, 2, 3, I think so 3 Gela blocks. Only one block was above 8. So definitely, I thought could be a Gela date to be a spraying, but I think so it was kind of still small. Definitely, if you see Ida Red was a day yesterday, perhaps was ready to 1250, and even the lateral were big. The New York 2 was also big. Honeycrisp I thought could be smaller, but I found Honeycrisp big. And if you see at the bottom, I went to a Honeycrisp next to the lake just to see the difference by the end of the day, and was a significant difference in the fruit side of that Honeycrisp block in the lake versus the ones inland. So I just want to show you that. I think so Ida Red yesterday was about 12. Is the only one. Honeycrisp was very close in one of the sides. Ida Red in another side was about 12 and very with big fruitlets in the laterals. When I was checking Honeycrisp, I should mention that in some of the blocks, I was able, because I take to measure the fruitlet, the fruit diameter, I take out the cluster leaves. And by doing that, I was able to see the frost damage at the very base of Honeycrisp fruitlets that were a tight cluster in April 21st. So I was able to see the ring of frost damage at the bottom that I couldn't have really seen without removing the cluster leaves. So that was very interesting for me to see, and I took photography. So I want to share that. I saw the frost damage, and I wouldn't have seen it without removing the cluster leaf from those clusters that I was sampling. So that is what I want to share. I don't know, Terence, if you want to ask me something about this. But if not, I want to pass this information to you, and perhaps could be useful for you for part of your presentation. This is inland side. All these measurements are inland side. The only one is a lake side at the bottom with Honeycrisp.
Thanks. Any questions from the audience for Mario? Okay, I think we're good. We're all waiting for Dr. Terence Robinson's recommendation. The floor is yours, Terence.
Okay, thank you. Nice to meet with everybody again. I've got some suggestions, and it's a complicated year because of the frost, but hopefully some of my suggestions will help guide you a little bit. The things that are important considerations this year for thinning is the frost damage. It's surprising to me that after that level of frost that many, many blocks have a really good fruit set, have a lot of a king still there. But there are areas in the Western New York fruit area that have very poor king flower survival. And they also have some lateral flowers in the cluster that are damaged. Now, the second thing to consider is what impact the petal fall sprays had. Those of you that are right on the lake may have just completed your petal fall sprays the last day or two. But inland sites are getting close to a week out from petal fall sprays. If you recall, the Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of a week ago was very, very warm. If you sprayed petal fall sprays during that timing where there was a significant carbohydrate deficit, you got very good thinning. For the trials we're doing at Geneva, we intentionally sprayed on Monday when it was getting close to 90 degrees, and then we had Tuesday 90 degrees. And we're seeing really nice thinning, but not over thinning from it. I think many growers were afraid of that level of heat and delayed applying those petal fall sprays until Wednesday. You got less thinning, but still you would have gotten a significant amount of thinning that I'll show you in just a minute from some of the fruit measurements that Mario's been taking. So those two factors, the frost and then what did we get from the petal fall thinning, is really what's going to guide us. I think it's essential that you assess the severity of the frost damage and what the initial fruit set was. So there's three things that you should try to look for when you look at a block or a variety within a block. First, what percent of the kings made it through the frost and are there? If it's a significant number of kings that are gone, I'm going to suggest one course of action in the next slide. But if they're all there, then I'm going to suggest a different course of action. But secondly, look at this, generally the spurs, and look at how many fruitlets seem to be growing. Now, the best is to measure fruitlets with a digital caliper and do the fruit growth rate model. But if you did not do that, just look at the fruits that are bigger than 8, maybe bigger than 9 millimeters based on the numbers that Mario just showed. And those are the fruits that will persist and are not in the process of falling off. If, as you search and look through that tree from top to bottom, you basically have one fruit per spur on most of the spurs, I don't think you need any more thinning. You either got the thinning from the frost or what you did at bloom and petal fall. If, however, you have two fruits on average per spur, then a mild thinning is suggested, which I'll mention in just a minute. But many, many blocks that I've seen have 3 or more fruits per spur. They may not have 5 or 6, but they have 3 or 4. Though that level of fruit set still indicates aggressive thinning. Make sure you're only counting those fruits that are bigger than 8 millimeters. A cluster that has 2 little fruits and 3 big fruits, the 3 big fruits will persist, but the 2 little fruits are in the process of falling off. The last thing that's important to do is cut fruitlets and look at the seeds if they're white and look like they're doing well versus brown seeds in the middle of that apple. With those 3 estimates of a block, then I would suggest these 3 rules that you might consider as you decide how much thinning. First, if there's 3 or 4 laterals which are alive that are growing, then I would thin normally at this 12 millimeter stage with a full dose. And I'll talk about how the carbohydrate model impacts the decision a little later on in the presentation, but as a general rule, a full dose. However, in a case where there's more damage from the frost, where we've lost more than 50% of the kings and you're already down to just 1 or 2 laterals that are alive, then I think you should thin, but with a reduced dose. Wait until the kings are 12 millimeters and the laterals are at least 10 before you put on that thinner. However, in a more severely damaged situation where most of the kings are damaged and many of the lateral flowers are damaged, and in this case we need to preserve fruits from bloom on 1-year wood, then I suggest even delaying thinning much later until the fruits on the 1-year wood, the king fruits, are 12 millimeters. By that time, the king fruits on spurs and many of the laterals will be 15 millimeters. So it would be a very delayed thinning time so that you don't thin off the fruits from bloom on 1-year wood. With those 3 rules in mind, I want to remind you that the best way to estimate how many fruits are still growing and will persist on a tree is to measure fruit diameters and run the fruit growth rate model. And if you do that, you can come up with a very precise estimate, as I'll show you in the next slide. The first step is to set your target for what you want per tree, and then estimate the number of fruitlets that are growing using the fruit growth rate model. With that data, I give you 3 rules of thumb that I like. First, if the number of fruitlets that will persist is greater than 2 times your target number, I think it justifies another full dose of chemical thinner on the next good weather window as guided by the carbohydrate model. If, however, your previous thinning and the frost has reduced the number of fruitlets that will persist to between 1.5 times and 2 times the target fruit number, then I think you apply a reduced rate of chemical thinner on the next good weather window. Let's use, for example, if your target number of fruit on a tall spindle tree, depending on the size, can be between 100 and 150, but let's just say it's 100. If when you run the fruit growth rate model, you have 150, 160, 170 fruit that's still growing between that 1.5 and 2 times the target number, I think another dose of chemical thinner is justified, but with a reduced dose. If, however, when you run the fruit growth rate model, you already have reduced the number of persisting fruits or growing fruits down to less than 1.5, then I don't think you add any more thinner. You're done. And you simply try to touch up the block with hand thinning in mid to late June. It's likely that a few more fruits will drop naturally, probably from a carbohydrate deficit that may come up in a week or 10 days. And so I don't think you should justify any more thinning if you're already down, in the example case, to less than 150 fruitlets that are growing. This is data from 2 sites in Western New York that we're running trials in, and this data was collected by Mario and Liz. They just got it to me today, and I ran it through the fruit growth rate model. I've taken away the name of the grower, but there's a Western New York site 1 and a Western New York site 2. In the first site, it's Honeycrisp. They had potentially 722 fruits per tree because we counted the total clusters and multiplied it by 5. They put on 2 blossom sprays of ATS and 1 spray of NA and 7 at petal fall. And we currently estimate that instead of 722 fruits on that tree, we're down to 274. However, their target is quite low. It's only 60. So they're still 4.6 times the target, meaning they need a significant amount of thinning in this next round. At Western New York site number 2, here the potential was only about 490 fruits, 500 fruits, we'll say, because they had less bloom. Their target is a little higher of 80 fruits per tree, and through the 2 sprays of ATS, followed by a petal fall spray of NA and 7, in this case 7.5 parts, they ended up with around 157 fruits that are still growing. That's exactly 2 times the target. So according to the rules I gave you in the previous slide, I would still thin that an additional time with a full dose. And then you would get much closer to the target of 80 fruits. If, however, either of these sites had thinned much more in that petal fall spray and we were already getting close to the target, we wouldn't spray again. Now, both of these cases, they delayed the petal fall spray till after the heat of a week ago when we got into the 90s. So they didn't get excessive or super thinning because they sprayed under cooler, less carbon deficit conditions, but they still got significant thinning from the 2 blossom sprays followed by the petal fall spray. I've only presenting here the carbohydrate balance for one location. This happens to be the Ferber farm in Sodus, New York from today, showing the carbohydrate balance basically since green tip. There's a vertical line showing when bloom was, or full bloom, and then the narrow blue box showing the small window for petal fall thinning, which happened when degree days was between 110 and 130 last week. And then upcoming, still not there yet, is a blue box showing when we'll be in the 10 and 13 millimeter thinning window. So this particular site is close to the lake, and they are not yet in the window for the 10 to 13 millimeter thinning window. And the fruit diameter data that Mario presented shows us that. In the bottom part of this slide is the table that you see from the carbohydrate model online at NUA, and it shows the days today and the next several days. So today it had a high in the SOTUS area predicted of 71, a carbohydrate deficit of minus 13, but since the days following that are all positive, it had a positive 6-day average of 8.88. But the degree days was only 162, meaning that the fruit weren't yet to the 10 to 13 millimeter size. As we move forward, tomorrow, 65 degrees, the next day, 69, the next day, 60, 31st, 65. So it's a relatively cool 5-day period coming up. None of the night temperatures are very warm, meaning they're less than 60, low 50s and high 40s. We have fairly decent sunshine for all the days. That combines to give us a carbohydrate surplus every single day up through 31st, which is Sunday. Now, once we get into next week, which doesn't show on the carbohydrate model, it shows temperatures, the forecast is temperatures to warm up, and I'm expecting some moderate deficits for those days. But in the last column, you see that there's a box around the bottom number for degree days, meaning that's when the window begins for the lake sites, particularly in Wayne County. And then you'll have 3 days. So it looks to me like Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, maybe Wednesday would be the optimum time to spray those sites close to the lake. Now, the challenge is, what do you do about inland sites? Mario's already showing us that in some cases the fruit size is good and at the proper stage to thin. And maybe today would have been a perfect day to put out the thinners, but we're now at 5 o'clock and this happens to us that we sometimes tell you, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. But assuming that you haven't put out the next round of thinners, what do you do? We're looking at 5 days of cool temperatures. Well, this is a problem that is not going to give us an easy solution, but I'm basically going to suggest wait till Monday. This is the same data that Mario showed. I didn't know he was going to show it, so I put it in here just in case, showing that some varieties are already up to 10 millimeters. No varieties outside the window, even Ida Red. I put this picture in on the right, which I got from Bobby Brown, showing that in this cluster, the biggest fruit has the sepals closing, meaning the calyx end is closing. But several of those, at least 3 of those flowers, the sepals aren't closing. But it looks like the fruit is expanding. What does that mean? It generally means that if the sepals aren't closing, it means it's not growing fast enough and it's probably going to fall off. So when you go out to count fruits that are going to persist, you can kind of also use this whether the sepals are closing or whether or not you think that fruit will persist past the next few days. So how would I suggest we use the model for 2026? I remind you that at this time, this is based on many, many years of work that we did and others have verified it, that either the NAA-based program or a Maxell-based program has its strongest effect on apples in New York when they're between 10 and 13 millimeters. So we expect to get decent thinning out of these chemicals if we have some help from a carbohydrate balance in the tree. This year, it looks to me like I can't see past Sunday, but it looks to me like that we're going to not have a deficit, which is bad. That we're going to have a moderate carbohydrate surplus, which will give relatively poor thinning. Now, I remind you that if when you get to Monday and you look at the carbohydrate model and it shows a deficit, then it's a different story. But it's not likely we're going to have the extreme deficits of a 6 day average of -40. The forecasted temperatures are not going to give us that. But this year, with a mild carbohydrate surplus, and if you sprayed Monday, it looks like it's still going to be a 6 day average of a surplus. I would use full standard rate, and that standard rate is published in the Cornell Recommends. Now, the university did not publish a recommends in 2026. However, I revised the thinning recommendations and published my chapter by myself. Well, actually, Valent printed it for us, and you each should have gotten a copy at the fruit schools. The fruit team has also put it out as an electronic file in one of their newsletters, and so you should be able to access it because for every variety that we grow, I give a base standard rate, what I would use under these kinds of conditions when I want a full dose. Even though the fruit size for inland sites is now at the appropriate thinning window, I suggest we wait until Monday or Tuesday to spray. By that time, even lake sites will be close, but they can probably go Tuesday through Thursday of next week. But by waiting, we'll get a little bit better carbohydrate status to help give some thinning. These suggestions are ones that are built into the carbohydrate model. I put them here just so you can think about them. When the carbohydrate balance is very, very positive, then I want you to increase the rate and include Regulate. But this year, it looks to me like the carbohydrate balance is going to be positive, but not really highly positive. And so you could increase rates a little bit, but I'm suggesting that you include Regulate in your spray. Now, I pause here for just a minute to talk about Regulate and Captan. Those who are already using Captan will then not be able to use Regulate because the Regulate gives too much uptake of Captan, and Captan is very toxic to the plant. So I suggest you not spray Captan 5, 6, 7 days before using Regulate in a thinning spray, or 5, 6, 7 days after a thinning spray where you use Regulate. But if it turns out, like I'm expecting, that next Monday and Tuesday we don't have a carbohydrate deficit, I would suggest you include Regulate in your thinning mix, whether it's an NAA-based program or a Maxell-based program. Now, I do have to say that the NAA-based programs react more strongly to Regulate than the Maxell-based program because Maxell comes already with a surfactant in it. But with an NAA-based program, Regulate increases the activity of the product at least 30 or 40%. So you get much better thinning on the years that we have this carbohydrate positive balance. Now, I list here the other rules that if the carbohydrate balance is negative between 0 and -20, -20 to -40, -40, but you'll notice in all three of those cases, I do not suggest Regulate. Where it's more negative than -40, don't apply the chemical thinner. Just wait for a better timing. And this is what happened a week ago on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, where the carbohydrate balance was very, very negative. The 6 day average never got below -40, but those were days of caution. And I can understand why many, many people chose not to thin on those days and waited. We went ahead at Geneva and sprayed on those days just so I could have the data to show what happens when you spray under those conditions at petal fall. This year, our options for chemical thinning are really the combinations of either NA and Carbaryl or BA and Carbaryl. There are some people, not that many anymore, who are trying to eliminate Carbaryl from their spray program for a marketing program. If you don't want to use Carbaryl, there's two other options. The benzoyladenine and NAA gives a very good response. And Maxell and Exceed has also given us a very good response without the use of Carbaryl. I listed here just 6 varieties that I wanted to throw up on what I would do where we have fruit numbers to justify it, more than 2 times the target still. I'd use a full dose of Maxell. and Carbaryl. For Honeycrisp, I like an NAA-based program. In this case, the full dose is 3 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis. For Macintosh, a little bit lower at 2 ounces on a tree roll volume dilute basis plus Carbaryl. Empire, I like the Maxell-based program. Spur Delicious and Fuji absolutely need a Maxell-based program because we get pygmy fruit on both of those when we use an NAA-based program. I'd like to just, even though I do this almost every time we talk about thinning, review with you how you would calculate the rates correctly. All of the rates I give in the printed document that you may have got at Fruit School or the electronic version the team sent you are based on what I call tree row volume dilute. Thus, to calculate how much chemical goes in the tank, you first have to calculate tree roll volume. I don't publish in the presentation the formula for that, but it's in that document and it's readily available and you can find it online. But once you know the tree roll volume, then you divide that tree roll volume by the volume of spray you're going to carry per acre, and that's called the concentration factor. In this example, I'm going to use a tall spindle orchard that's 3 by 11, about 10.5 feet tall, about 4 feet wide. Its tree roll volume measures out to 150 gallons per acre. But let's suppose you're only spraying 75 gallons to the acre. Then 150 divided by 75 gives you a concentration factor of 2. So the rates that I gave you on the previous page, or that are printed in the document I've distributed, let's use the example of Honeycrisp. I'm suggesting for this spray a 3 ounces of NA on a dilute basis, but since there's a concentration factor of 2, we multiply by 2. That gives us 6 ounces for every 100 gallons in the spray tank. Our sprayer holds 5 of these hundreds, so 5 times 6 gives me 30 ounces of NA that goes in the spray tank. So that's a number that's kind of, you need to keep in mind. For a decent dose of NA, in most tall spindle, super spindle blocks, we're going to be somewhere about 30 ounces of NA. For a low dose, we might be at only 20 ounces, for example, for Macintosh. For the Maxell example, the full dose is 64 ounces, but the concentration factor is 2 times 64 gives us 128 ounces or a full gallon of Maxell. There's 5 of those in our sprayer, so we put 5 gallons of Maxell on the spray tank. That gives you a sense of what kind of amounts of Maxell go in a tank. For lower dose varieties, where I give us a lower dose of Maxell, it's going to be somewhere between 3.5 to 4 gallons to the sprayer tank. Now, because of this carbohydrate surplus, I am suggesting this year that you use Regulate. But I want to reemphasize, check the model Monday morning and see if we really still are in a surplus situation for the 6-day forecast. A couple of tips to end with on things you should consider. The orchards I've looked at are not that heavy in the bottom, partially due to the frost, but also the petal fall spray or the blossom sprays. Therefore, concentrate most of the spray in the upper half of the tree. 75 to 80% of the spray should go up there, and only 25 or 20% in the bottom of the tree. The rules for surfactant, I've stated them already, but they are on years like this with a surplus, include Regulate, but on years with a deficit, do not include Regulate. So this year, as I'm expecting Monday and Tuesday to be, use Regulate. My summary is that for sodas, and certainly all the inland sites could go ahead and spray Friday. The fruit size will be right, but the relatively low temperatures, I don't think we'll get the thinning we want. But by waiting till Monday, even though Monday's not that hot of a day, it's followed by 4 good days. And I think we'll get better thinning by waiting till Monday or Tuesday. If you're right on the lake, you'll be looking at Tuesday, Wednesday. Use a full rate of NA or Maxell where there was little frost damage. Make sure that you include the pint of carbaryl and use Regulate. I'm really pleasantly surprised that in Western New York, many of the orchards look like they have done well and they've survived that frost. So they really need this spray at 10 to 13 millimeters. Now, those of you who have had very heavy damage, and I feel bad for you, and you should take these words with caution and thin with a lighter dose. That's all the comments I wanted to make today, but I'd be happy to have more discussion with any questions or things you want to share.
Thank you, Terrence. Questions, comments, discussion? The chat box or unmute?
So I noticed that Alan Laxo joined us. I just want to again thank him for this carbohydrate model. It becomes such a tool, such a crutch. I can't even walk anymore without that crutch.
For sure. Thanks, Alan. I think somebody
So,
was about to speak.
yeah, Mark Russell here, Craig. I just want Terrence to walk me into this window of appropriate size where the materials work best for thinning when you're between 10 and 13. To me, it sounds like if I've got a good set of kings and I want to thin off laterals, I should be ignoring the kings and measuring the laterals and getting the laterals in that 10 to 13 window and not worrying about that king because I don't want to thin off the king. Am I making a mistake or am I hearing you right?
I think you're not hearing me correctly. So those laterals, they're more sensitive when they're below 10 millimeters. Once they get to 10 millimeters, they're getting enough support that they're harder to thin off. So I usually base this fruit diameter on the king diameter. Now, the data shows that when king diameters get to 10 and laterals are 7, that's when you can thin those laterals off. But kings can then progress to 11, 12, 13. Reality is even 14, you can still thin laterals off, which are now 10, maybe up to 11. But once kings get to 15, we just can't seem to thin off the laterals. And unfortunately, NAA loses its effectiveness for thinning once you get fruits to 15 millimeters. So let's continue, at least so that we're on the same page, talking about the diameter of the kings. But I do want to tell you the window's a little wider than 10 to 13. It's probably 10 to 15. But if your kings are past 15, you're not going to get much out of NAA anymore.
No. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And that's the dilemma for people that are not lakeside, that are inland. Are those kings going to be past 15 when we get to Monday? I don't think so because we got cool temperatures coming. They're going to grow probably a little less than a half a millimeter per day.
But then, Terrence, can we look ahead towards a rescue thinning and the possibility of using a seed and getting a better response?
Absolutely. So Exceed is a valuable product, as will be Brevis next year. Now, other states are using Brevis this year. We
Brevis is
can't.
always a year away.
But nevertheless, we do have Exceed this year, but I want to make this very important point because I've seen some recommendations out of Eastern New York that trouble me. We get almost no thinning or very little from Exceed by itself. The best thinning we've ever gotten at these big fruit sizes of 16, 17, and 18 is when we have Exceed mixed with Maxell. And so this year I'm doing a lot of different studies trying to figure out, how can we make Exceed more effective, more potent by looking at all kinds of combinations of surfactants. But until I have better data, the only thing that's working, and I would say that Eastern New York as well, Mike Baisdell's had poor results with Exceed at 16 millimeters, unless it's mixed with Maxell.
Thanks. Got a question from Jimmy. Recommendations for Zestar.
Cut them down. No, I'm joking. So they tend to get big fairly fast and they should be thinned already, but I've tended to do well thinning them with a modest dose of NAA, similar to Max. But on petal fall, I like to have a higher dose at 7.5 parts per million of NAA. But at this timing, especially if you're going to wait till Monday, I would just use the 2 ounces or 5 parts per million of NAA plus Carbaryl.
Other questions, folks?
Terence, thinking
Yes.
about extension work for next week. I don't know, it could be worth to try to measure in the lake across the region, the fruit side, that where we're gonna be next Monday or Tuesday, and try to send that information to growers based on where we're gonna be at that moment?
Oh, I
Do you
think it'd
think?
be very valuable. I
Do you
think
think?
growers should go measure their own fruits, but
Mhm.
if you have time and are willing on Monday or Tuesday to measure lakeside orchards like you did with this list of varieties and then put it out
Yes.
on the fruit facts, it'd be
Yeah,
very valuable.
and thinking how we could collaborate on Monday and Tuesday and send that information just for at least late sites and see where we're gonna be
Yeah.
with the low temperature that are coming in
No, I
Sunbury.
agree. And I love the word that we can collaborate. But what I'm hearing is you do all the work and send it out, and I'll say it's we.
But we can try.
Yeah.
We can try.
Yeah, I want to
Okay.
reinforce how valuable it is to do your own measurements. As otherwise, Mario's used this phrase, and I like it. You're flying blind. You really don't know what's going on, what's going to fall off, and really make better thinning decisions. If you don't get those electronic calipers out and do a little measuring, it's super, super, super helpful because there's so much variation. Even in a year without frost and crazy weather swings, it's super variable, super variable. And we hope technology will help that in the future, but for now, the best thing to do is measure those fruitlets. Anything else, folks?
Do you have
Well, great.
is there I mean, if it's already in the handout you printed, Terence, you don't have to bother me with it, but I can't open it right now. Is there a Pink Lady recommendation
Yes,
you
Pink
have?
Lady for us thins easy. And so I like to use the 2 ounces of NAA. If there's, well, I want to add, Pink Lady seems to have taken the frost worse than almost any other variety from what I've seen. In the Hudson Valley, it was the worst. And so there, I'm very cautious of what kind of frost damage you had on Pink Lady. Now, you're close to the lake and maybe you didn't get it, but the 2 ounce rate of NA is all I want to put on. But if there's frost, only 1 ounce of NA. So in a whole sprayer, you might be putting on only 10 ounces of NA in a pint of carbaryl if you had some frost damage. I don't know why Pink Lady seemed to be so sensitive this year to frost, but it's among all the varieties, it's the one that took it the worst.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, folks? Reminder, if you want to revisit it, or if you have other growers and industry folks that have missed it, we'll send it out as soon as we get the link, as soon as Liz can do a quick edit for us and post it to our YouTube channel. We'll send it out probably sometime tomorrow morning through the email blasts and the fruit facts. I want to thank Terence and Mario for your time and valuable information. And everybody have a great rest of their afternoon. Thank you, folks.